Hey, what's up? It's time to lay back and listen. Turn the world off and tune in.
Mengapa kau nyalakan api cinta di hatiku, membakar jiwa yang merana.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to the first installment of Lay Back and Listen. It's time to do just that. So, like, share, and subscribe so you get notifications for every installment and all the other things that are going to be coming. Before I begin, I just want to give a special shout out to those who pushed me to jump into this medium. And I'm not going to tell y'all they said y'all don't read. But let's get into it. Lay back and listen. Monster Killah, written by yours truly. Tepid liquid ran down her smooth inner thigh, like river water coursing through a red clay stretch of land, ending in a pool near her ankle. Near her body, broken pieces of her life lay strewn about, giving the scene an even more violent appearance. The house was eerily quiet, the wind outside teasing a window curtain through the raised sash, the smell of the coming rain not strong enough to cover the odor of blood that was growing thick in the average-sized den. Her chic pencil skirt pushed up around her hips, buttons popped from the high-collar button-down she wore. The young girl was battered and bruised, looking both the same and nowhere near like herself. As she attempted to stand, the severity of her blood loss became swiftly apparent. She stumbled, barely holding herself upright, staggering through the hall into the living room that was washed in heavy darkness. Mari held her body tight as she turned over furniture and broken lamps, thrust her back into the violent scene that had taken place seemingly moments ago. His powerful arms turned over the heavy cherry wood table in the area off the kitchen, sending the smoke glass centerpiece crashing to the wood floor despite the cushioning of the pattern rug beneath it. The wine glasses, which held an expensive Merlot, hit the wall with a smash and splash that oddly reminded her of fireworks. Bitch, is this what you think I'm worth? Is this how you want me to spend my 26th birthday? Prime exclaimed. He was in her face so suddenly that she instinctively flinched in preparation for the blow that was surely coming. This only fueled his ire even more, and his eyes darkened. The one that she had loved was gone, replaced by a monster to be hated. Once upon a time, I loved Prime. I was in love, under love, and around love. I thought that there was no comparison with his looks, his ambition, and the strong sexual attraction we shared. We would have the deepest conversations about life and past lives while spending all our free time together. Anything that we did together was fun and entertaining. We could be silly together without reservation. It had been that way from the beginning. I gave him my time because I always wanted to be near him. He gave me his because I thought he felt the same. Later on, there would prove to be a whole other motive behind that habit, attentiveness turning to something different without me even noticing. I guess love can make you blind, but I think there is much more to it. Love makes you aware, insanely aware of yourself and your lover, your likes, dislikes, wants, and needs. The awareness of these things causes you to neglect more important issues, like the number of calls just to see what you are up to, and spending too much time together. I guess in most relationships, you saturate yourselves and your mate, and then you start to drift away. But in other relationships, one or both parties latch on tight, yielding themselves to an impossibly wild and dangerous ride. I, never in a million years, would have thought that my beauty, poise, and intelligence would have brought me so far and yet so low. At the age of 23, I'd already accomplished more than most will have in their entire adult lives. I had a good childhood filled with love and guidance, family trips, and a little spoiling by my mother. She made sure I went to the best schools in our area, was well rounded with after school activities, and a part time job helping a neighbor in her bookstore. Followed by early entrance into college, which was to parlay into a successful law career. But I switched majors and pursued my long-time love of dance. I auditioned at Juilliard, and the rest was history for me. I began dancing in shows, mostly off Broadway productions, and some shows so shoddily produced only family ever saw them. But I was working. Working these small shows was my experience that was necessary to greater things later, and it was also how I came to meet Prime. After one show that was pitiful at best but compassionately choreographed, the cast members went to one of our favorite haunts to have a drink, despite being against our strict diets as dancers. But hey, we needed them that night. We were in the corner dancing, wedged between the pool table and a jukebox in a little place called Keys, which was once a popular hangout for jazz musicians in bygone eras. I was the tipsiest I had been in years, since about 17 at a party my parents had, my dancing alternating between booty shaking, twerking, and pirouetting. I had just executed a perfect arabesque despite my drunken state when he emerged from a back room amidst a cloud of smoke. His reddened eyes fixated on me, brought me out of my dancer's first position that I am so accustomed to standing in. I reached for the remnants of my third drink and downed it in one gulp. That was definitely the wrong move. The heat of the rich honey liquor flooded my body and fueled the flames that were licking my brain from the intensity of his gaze. It was love at first sight for me, but now looking back, it was more like lust. In that moment, though, I knew I wanted to have him as mine for longer, much longer than a night. My life until that instant was filled with meaningless, albeit safe gratification with classmates, castmates, instructors, producers, even a teacher. I'd always believed that good sex was like art, similar to dancing. Love had been an evasive grail, one that I honestly had no deep desire for, with the exception of those brief times when good sex became a mistaken suspect for the crime. My youth made me too selfish for love. My dreams were far more important than sweet nothings. But when it came to Prime, a sweet nothing is exactly what had me caught hook, line, and sinker. I think I ate the rod. His approach was far more distinguishing than the usual, baby, let me buy you a drink, although he did that night and the next night after my performance. When he stepped to me that first night in Keys, his words were so confident. He spoke as though he'd known me all my life and had only been away for a short while. In my ear, so as not to embarrass me in front of everyone, he said, please allow me to attend your next show because your skills must have you performing on Broadway. Prom was amazing. Later, once we got to know each other a little better, I asked him how he knew I was a professional dancer. He said it was because he hadn't seen me at any of the neighborhood strip joints. I thought he was being serious until I noticed the gleam in his eye and the smile tugging hard at the corner of his incredible mouth. He laughed and I joined him, and he went on to explain that it was my carriage mixed with my dance moves that told him that I was more than just a bedroom mirror dancer, and he felt that with my undeniable talent, I surely must be on someone's stage. I could have eaten him with a spoon. He was so sweet and attentive, kind and giving. Giving. He spoiled me more in the beginning of our relationship than my whole life with my parents. Now, I thought out loud, he's giving me nothing but grief. As my thoughts refocused on the present, I noticed a low wail of far off sirens. No wonder he took off. Someone must have called the cops. I realized as my mind began to click and whir like the startup of a computer. I do not want to sit in a precinct all night like a criminal. I do not want to be questioned about things that I do not remember. I really do not want to be a victim, not theirs and not his. So I decided then to do what I should have done after that first explosion: run. I searched for my keys both mentally and physically, trying to recall with my mind and see with my eyes. As the sirens grew louder, I began to panic, thinking that Prime had taken my keys. My heart rate sped up and my breathing quickened as I began to feel trapped again. Finally, I remembered that I had a spare set hidden in a flower pot in the yard. I moved to the side door as quickly as I could, given the bleeding and intense pain. I stopped to pull a package from its hiding spot and then continued to the door. I had to get to my car before the police got to me. I had a getaway bag stashed where my spare tire should be. Prime had run flats installed when we first started dating. The clothes in it would last a few days until I got my mind together. One thing for sure, two things for certain. I was out of here. I hobbled to the car, trying not to draw too much attention to myself. The older woman next door seemed to be watching, but she was a little nutty, and no one took anything she said seriously. I used to refer to her as Mrs. Kravitz from the old reruns that I loved to watch as a child. Mostly my mom only got the reference. My mom, I thought. I knew my mom would freak out when she heard about this. I didn't have time to call and warn her. I didn't want to get pulled over for talking on my cell phone while driving. I was already bloody, disheveled, and nervous as hell. I didn't even know where I was headed, really. I was in panic mode, but I was calm at the same time. I felt like I was doing the right thing. I didn't want the police all in my business. When had they ever helped a victim, really? I've seen a gazillion Lifetime movies and heard real stories on the news about women who try to leave and get restraining orders and the system fails them. I don't want to be a statistic or a victim. No, I could go to a hotel and stay the night and see what tomorrow brings. Maybe the police will see that no one's at home, go away, and forget the whole thing. Maybe Prime will just humbly pack his belongings and go away. My phone rang, but I ignored it and kept moving. I turned back and looked at my little house that I'd taken my time decorating with interesting pieces and photos of me dancing throughout the years in black and white. I thought about the damage Prime had done, not only to my house, which I had opened to him, but to me as well, not just physically, but mentally, and shuddered. I was not the same, and even if I came home and he moved, changed, tainted. The sirens were getting closer. I knew that it was a matter of time before they turned onto my street. My little house looked just like all the little houses on the block, save for the bright blue of the front door and birds of paradise in pots on my little white porch. I turned the ignition over and the engine of my Benz roared to life and purred softly, waiting for me to escape, soothing me inadvertently. I shifted into drive and slid my car out of its spot. Hearing the sirens ahead of me, I U-turned in front of my house, took one last glance, and raced to the end of my street and turned left. I made another left and pulled in behind a late model Acura. I kept the engine running. I just needed a minute to clear my head and figure out where I was going to go. I figured a motel would be best because I didn't want to get any of my family or friends involved. Most of my family would flip out if they knew what Prime had done to me, and I wasn't in the mood for lectures or drama. I looked at my phone expecting it to be that crazy man who had left me for dead, but the missed calls turned out to be from Lisbeth, a girl from the dance troupe who was more foe than friend and only called to gossip and to talk about how evil she thought the director was and how everyone hated her. I didn't have time for that, so I'm glad I didn't answer. In the distance, I could hear the sirens come to a halt. I could picture the patrol cars pulling up to my house, officers at my door. Mrs. Kravitz standing on her lawn, inching closer and telling all my business to anyone in earshot. I could see the officers radioing to the station that there was no answer at the residence, that it seemed no one was home, questioning anyone nearby who may have seen or heard anything, remarking how mysterious this whole episode was, and then getting in their cars and finishing their shift. I readjusted my body to alleviate the aches that were beginning to creep up my back. I knew that if it wasn't for my good physical condition, I'd be in a lot worse pain. I put my seatbelt on and put the car in reverse, then pulled into the street. I maneuvered myself onto the main thoroughfare after a few turns and navigated my way to the highway. With no clear direction, I just drove, without any music, just my thoughts and the muffled traffic noise outside. I wanted to cry, but tears were useless to me now because my emotions for Prime had been waning steadily for months. If I did cry, they would be more for the circumstances I was facing than the love that had been lost. I wasn't that type of girl. That romance was meant to be purely physical, just like all the other relationships I had conducted and carried on over the years. I had befriended more than loved for so long. I guess this is the result of not really loving enough. I'd found myself in something loveless and was mistaken about the truth of it. Oh well, c'est la vie. This drama will pass and will be just a chapter in my life. I'm more than a survivor. I conquer, I run, I roar. I laughed at myself, the pain of the unexpected smile hurting my lip and cheek. I hadn't even looked in the mirror. I only felt what hurt and where and figured I was a mess, even though no one will admit it. Being beautiful is such a big part of my dance livelihood. I didn't need to be with anyone who would try to take my dreams and my career from me. We weren't going to work because the jealousy was increasing, and I knew deep down that it was only a matter of time before I would have to leave or end up barefoot and pregnant. I had to dance. I danced in my sleep. I moved and ran through choreography when I was standing still. It relieved my stress in situations tremendously. It was who I was, not what I did. My parents even knew that it was serious because I usually did what they wanted. For me to switch up and change my major was, well, major. So I refused to let anyone or anything keep me from dancing. My growling stomach brought me out of my thoughts. I'd been driving for a few hours. I was low on fuel and hungry. My body was tired from being in the same position. I needed a hot, warm bath. I'd covered quite a distance in the hours I'd been driving, so I felt safe enough to exit and grab a bite to eat and some gas. I thought about getting a room at the nearest exit, but I wanted to drive a little more. I wasn't sleepy, and I didn't want to get in a room and not be able to rest. I saw a sign for a Subway restaurant attached to a pilot truck stop. I exited the highway and pulled up to a pump, grabbed my emergency cash that I'd hidden from Prime. It wasn't much. Most of my stash was secure in a second bank account, but I didn't have a debit card for it. I didn't want to use my primary account card for fear that Prime would check the account and discover that I left town. I went inside, placed my order, and then went to the ladies' room. When I came to the sink to wash my hands, my eyes met the mirror and I almost passed out. My face was foreign to me. There were purplish red marks along my neck, collarbone, and on my arms. I looked brutalized. I grabbed some paper towels and dabbed gingerly at the dry blood on my lid and near my hairline. There was a gash there that might need medical attention. I cleaned up as best I could, then stepped out into the gas station part of the store. I looked around and located a small tube of A&D ointment and some gauze. I grabbed an energy drink, a Twix, and paid for my first day's supplies and gas. I stopped past the Subway counter and got my sandwich that I had asked the young freckled clerk to hold for me. She'd thrown a cookie in with my sandwich. I gave her a small smile and exited. She came from behind the counter and went over to the gas attendant as I walked out. I guess my appearance was to be discussed. I tried not to let it bother me as I moved toward my car. I placed my purchases in the car and popped the gas tank open. As I filled the car up with petrol, I thought about women who had to go to work and school and interact with their children while scarred with black eyes and broken bones. I was bothered by the actions of the ladies in the store, but my own thoughts haunted me more. I placed the nozzle back on the pump and discarded the receipt. I was angry. I got in the car and drove over to the vacuum station slightly out of the view of the attendant. I sat there for a minute, not doing anything. There was no music on, only the generic pop tunes that played on the loudspeaker near the pumps a few feet away. I pulled the visor down and flipped it open to expose the mirror. The bright light made me blink rapidly, and I kept my eyes open for a few seconds. I took a deep breath and looked at myself, turning my head to and fro slowly. I was beautiful and broken, my tawny complexion ruddy and unclean. The places where I dabbed at the dry blood in the restroom were still bloody and starting to discolor. No wonder the women had looked at me. My appearance was to be discussed because it was alarming, frightening, and downright sad. Maybe they wore scars veiled beneath their uniforms and smiles. The tears collected and threatened to spill over, unleashing a deluge of emotions. I placed my thumb and forefinger on the sides of my nose, and the urge subsided. I began to pull the ointment and gauze from the bag, stopped to squeeze a few pumps of waterless sanitizer onto my hand, and rub vigorously. I touched each spot and checked for tenderness, trying not to cause myself more pain in the process. Then I opened the tube of ointment and gingerly applied it to the various places where I thought it might help. The cut near my hairline got a little more ointment, and I placed the gauze over it. I cleaned my hands with a baby wipe and then pulled out my dinner. I put the car in gear and headed out of the station, taking note of the bowed head of the older pilot attendant. I jumped onto the road and took the on-ramp for the highway. I turned on the radio and started to eat my sandwich. I ate half and saved the other for later. I would have to stop soon. I could drive all night, but I needed to rest my body. My phone began to ring just as I spotted a billboard for a Holiday Inn Express in 11 miles. I dug around in my purse and located it. I'd never seen that number before, but it looked like a local government number. I guess the police hadn't given up on the disturbance call. I shrugged, too worn out by the whole affair to care really. I will worry about all of this after a good night's sleep. I hit the exit for the Holiday Inn and whipped into a parking spot and grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk. I went and paid cash for a room and asked that my room number and name not be given out. I pulled my hair back, revealing my wound, and looked into the clerk's eyes, pleading with my own. If there is a shift change, please make them aware of the situation as well, I asked. No problem, ma'am, the clerk assured me. I understand completely. I didn't care about the pity. I needed my anonymity. I took my key with my head held high and took the elevator to my room. I entered, took a look around, peeked out the door, and swept the hallway with my eyes. I put the privacy tag on the door, then shut it, using the top lock as well. I leaned back against the door. I was done. My cell had been ringing like crazy for hours. I couldn't bring myself to answer, afraid it would be Prime or the police, not knowing which was worse. A part of me wanted Prime to care enough to call just a little bit, even though he left me for dead for the police to find, for me to be humiliated all over again. No, forget him. He can fall off the face of the earth for all I care. I know one thing, I have nothing to say to the police. They will make it my fault for not leaving him, for not doing something. Well, I am going to do something. They need not worry about Mari. I, for once, will do that for myself. The clock in the hotel room seemed to be stuck in the 2 o'clock hour. Every time I opened my eyes, it was still there, or maybe I just wasn't sleeping. I was exhausted mentally and physically, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I needed to plan my next move because I couldn't stay in this motel in this podunk town forever. I was afraid to use my credit cards for fear they were being traced. I didn't want to call my family. Their phones could be tapped. Wait a minute. Why was I thinking like a criminal? I could call my mom. She would wire me some money, no questions asked, at least for a little while anyway. Despite the fact that my choices about my life bothered my mother a little, she always stood beside me and had my back when I needed her. If anything, she would be angry that I didn't call sooner and let her know that I was okay. I dialed the number that had been the same since I first learned my phone number at age 4. I let it ring once, hung up, then called again, and let it ring twice, then hung up. It was a secret code between us that I made up in high school. If she was home, she would call me back immediately. My phone rang almost as soon as I pressed the end button. I took a deep breath and answered, without saying a word. My mother was speaking so fast, the faint twang of her accent made me want to hug her more. I knew that she had to be upset. She worked very hard to erase the southern accent that made her different in her youth after my grandparents moved her north. When she finally took a pause, I spoke, trying hard not to let my voice waver, although I was trying so hard not to cry. I wanted and needed my mommy. I was bruised, broken, and afraid. I knew that if I asked, she would come to me in this strange town, in this slightly dingy hotel, with me on the run without question. Well, she would question, a lot, just as she is doing now. Getting caught up in my thoughts cost me control of the conversation. I never had it anyway, really. Mommy, I'm sorry, I finally managed. Everything is okay, but I need you to send me some money just until I figure some things out. I don't really want to go to my bank. Without hesitation, my mom took down the information of the nearest Western Union. I'd driven past several on my way into town, but since I was headed in the opposite direction, I needed the closest one to me. What I learned in the conversation with my mom was more valuable than the money she was sending. Prime had not contacted her, which meant he was probably running too. Police had come to her house full of questions and scary scenarios as to my whereabouts. They assumed from my neighbor's statements and the scene we left behind that Prime and I had an altercation and fled the scene together to avoid domestic violence charges. My mother, in her infinite wisdom and street savvy, failed to tell them that I would never have fled any scene. She told them most likely Prime had taken me against my will to avoid persecution and would probably do further harm to me. She cried a little when she detailed the pictures that they showed her of my once beautiful townhome that was now as blood spattered and damaged as I was. I assured her that it was much worse than it looked and told her that I would call her soon. I thanked her and told my mother I loved her with all of my being. We did not say goodbye, but I felt her hesitation about hanging up without doing so. We never said goodbye before, and I wasn't about to start saying it now that I was in trouble. She felt different, I could tell, but I just couldn't. So we left it at I love you, and my promises to call filled the air before the line went dead. I sighed. I wanted to cry again, but I didn't have time. I didn't know if my mom line was bugged or what. I grabbed my bag, wiped down the hard surfaces in the room, and beat it out of there as fast as I could. 3 minutes later, I was pulling up at a corner gas station slash gas pump. There was only one pump, so I really couldn't call it a station. I took my ID out and filled out the Western Union slip that I grabbed from another store in the car, so I would spend as little time as possible in the store with my view obstructed and no way out. I hopped out of the car, my big shade secured with my wild hair around my face. I slouched as I walked, trying to hide my dancer's posture. The strangest things can attract attention and make you memorable. I wore a simple tank top, flannel shirt with ripped skinny jeans and some Timberland boots from about 3 seasons ago. In addition to my getaway bag that was stowed in my trunk, there was a box of items that I'd been meaning to drop off at the women's shelter, but kept forgetting in my hectic schedule. I was glad for that. Some of the places I was finding myself in were far too casual for the designer things packed in my bag. I would have stuck out like a sore thumb with no business on these backward roads. I could not draw attention to myself. When I walked in, there was no mechanical ding dong of city stores, just an antiquated bell that looked as if it once hung around a real cow's neck. The dust inside was just as heavy as it was outside. The goods on the store shelves were neat and tidy, as if freshly stocked or dusted. The middle aged lady behind the counter looked just as coated with dust as the windows, but she wore bright red lipstick and purple eyeshadow, I guess an attempt to catch the eye of any male who happened to stumble through town. Lucky for me, the look of interest she gave me was more about my sudden appearance than my sexuality. How can I help you? She nearly drawled, but a haughty nature seemed to clip her words just a bit. Western Union, please, I said politely, not wanting to use many words in an attempt to discourage any excess conversation. All right, she said, taking my slip and ID. She studied me for half a beat, then began plugging away to her machine, which must have been a computer at about the time she should have been wearing bright red lipstick. I spun around and grabbed a can of Coke and a pack of Twizzlers. I hadn't eaten in quite a while and planned to find a good place to eat as soon as I got a good distance away from this town. When I came back to the counter, she told me that she could only give me half of what my Western Union was for. There wasn't enough money in the register. I told her that was fine. I have to eat and get gas anyway. She gave me a receipt that showed the balance of my money transfer. A lot more than half. I paid for my drink and candy and hurried out of the door. I'd been there a few minutes too long. As I made my way back to my car, I took note of how dusty it was and was glad that I hadn't had a chance to wash it before all this went down. I hopped in and started the car, then took a second to check my phone. 3 new voicemails. I would have to check them when I got to my next destination. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed towards the nearest highway. I didn't want to use my GPS and fear that someone could trace it. I was sick of living like a fugitive, but I really didn't see another way. There's no time to cry or feel sorry for myself. My wounds within were healing much faster than the external injuries. I was becoming angered at the situation. Even the fear of him was dissipating. My strongest fear was of the detectives who were surely out to solve this confusion, even if it wasn't a crime. I came out of my daze just in time to notice that there was a diner with only a few cars just ahead on my left. This is the kind of place that doesn't survive on passersby, so they must have pretty decent food. I was starving. Despite my immense hunger, I only ordered a small salad with their house soup. The grill smelled amazing, but I didn't want a heavy meal. Finally, I threw caution to the wind and ordered a grilled chicken to go with my salad. I accepted the coffee the waitress offered and settled into the booth. I needed time to formulate a plan. This whole adventure is stupid. I shouldn't be in this town away from my family and friends just because some dude couldn't keep his hands to himself. I have to find out what the police are thinking and what Prime is up to right now. My food arrived. I blessed the meal and kept on thinking. The money that my mom sent is enough for about a week in a crappy hotel or maybe 2 or 3 days in a better hotel. That would be enough to let things cool off. Then I could go home. Well, somewhere near it. Home was over, at least for me and Prime. Prime. Something tells me that he isn't done with me. Unless the cops caught him, which I doubt. My mother would have called me. Then I remembered the messages waiting on my phone. I debated on whether to or not to finish my meal and get out of there before I called my voicemail. Feeling disconnected from my world made me dial the number, turn down my earpiece volume, and press the phone more closely to my ear. She wanted me to call her and perhaps discuss the events that occurred in my residence the day before. I guess the desire to get me back home was getting to the lead detectives in charge of my case. They thought the woman would draw me out? Not falling for that. Delete. The next message pulled me up short. The humor and the color drained out of my face as the recognition registered instantly. Bitch, I know that you are the reason why my ass is in lockup. When I see you, I am really gonna hurt your ass. You think I left you for dead? You ain't seen shit. And if I see you in the street, you better head to your mom's house immediately and bring the coroner with you, stinking slut. He laughed. Then the call was disconnected. My hand shook as I hit 9 to save the message. I almost hit 7 out of habit, but quickly regained my senses. I couldn't believe he'd be so bold. Well, actually, I could. But he not only threatened me, he'd also threatened my mom. Things just got realer. The next message was from my mother. She expressed her growing concern and confusion. She wanted me to come home. I teared up as I thought back to Prime's words. No, Mommy, I muttered to myself. I will not be home anytime soon. My mom didn't mention Prime's arrest, which meant that either he was locked up while in the midst of committing some other offense, or the detectives just didn't bother with notifying her. And I can only feel safe to assume that the latter of the two is true, because Prime holds me responsible for his legal problems. Why doesn't he take responsibility for his own actions? He insulted me. I didn't do this to him. He did it to himself. I'm just unlucky enough to be roped up in it. I shook my head as I gathered up my things. I needed to get a few hours of driving in before it got too late. I was eager to get a room, clear my head, and form a plan. I didn't know if Prime would start searching for me once freed, but did know that his business dealings required him to have an attorney on retainer, and he was damn good. Prime would be out tomorrow, if not sooner. I left enough for my meal and a healthy tip on the table and headed to the restroom. I splashed some water on my face and stood there looking at my reflection. I'd aged at least 5 years in 2 days, but at least my bruising was fading. My hair was wild and frizzy. My usually radiant skin lacked its glow, and there were dark bags under my eyes. Just call me Prada face. I hurried out the restaurant and into my car. I headed for the highway and cranked up the stereo. I needed the radio to soothe me. Vivian Green was wailing about emotional roller coasters, and now I knew more than ever the ride she was on. I just drove with no real direction, fueled by fear and anxiety. I couldn't believe that Prime thought that I had gone to the police. When had I ever? I mean, maybe if he hadn't beaten me and left me unconscious, he wouldn't think that. If I had been out for a few more minutes, they may have caught me in there or making my getaway. I would have been beyond angry if I had woken up in a hospital or worse, the police precinct. This was already a living nightmare. The last months with Prime had been a living nightmare, really. This was like waking up and finding out the dream was real. Well, that's it for the first installment. Thanks for tuning in to Lay Back and Listen. I hope you'll join us next time. Peace. Wait, before you go. Did you click the like button? Did you subscribe? Did you share? It's free. And I know you hear it all the time, but just do it. Love ya.